Alright, in this video we're talking about integers, and just a reminder what an integer is. It says it's positive and negative whole numbers and zero. So that would be any number that might live on this number line forever in both directions. So it's only whole numbers, so no decimals, no fractions. Yeah, just like counting numbers, like 1, 2, 3, but they can also be negative. Alright, so our first example. I think I'm going to do about 5 examples, so make sure you leave room for them. Okay, example 1. Let's do 2 times negative 4. So when I think about 2 times negative 4, I think about it, so remember this is multiplying because there's nothing between the 2 and the parentheses, so this just means multiply. So I'm thinking about this as 2 groups of negative 4. So if I were to draw out my tiles, I have negative 4, and then I have 4 more negatives because there's 2 groups. And if I was to count all those up, if I count these 4 and these 4, I would have 8 negatives. Okay, all right, another example. Let's do negative 3 times 4. Okay, so even though they're flipped, I'm going to think about the same way. So this is negative 3 times 4. You can always put that little dot if it makes you feel better to remind you it's multiplying. Okay, so negative 3 times 4. I think about that as 4 groups of negative 3. So I have negative 3, negative 3, negative 3, negative 3. So I have 4 groups of those. And if I count total, I have 3, 6, 9, 12 negatives. So my answer would be negative 12. Okay. So we can see here that if I multiply a positive times a negative, I'm going to get a negative number because there's a bunch of negatives here. And the same thing, if I multiply a negative times a positive, I'm still going to get a negative. It's the same thing, it's just like the order doesn't matter here because I still have a bunch of negatives. So over here, let's write some notes. So we know that a positive times a positive equals a positive. That's what you've learned in other grades. But now we're learning that if you do a positive times a negative, that's going to equal a negative, as we can see over here. And then for the second example, we learned that a negative times a positive equals a negative as well. Okay, and remember, if you ever forget these rules, you can always draw out the negatives like I did here. Okay, let's do another example. All right, what if I have negative 2 times negative 3? Okay, so this time both the numbers are negative. This one's kind of a little different to think about. So I'm going to think about it as 2 groups of negative 3. And I'm going to ignore that negative for now. So I have 3 negatives and 3 negatives. Okay, but it told me that it's negative 2 groups. And when I think of negative 2 groups, I think of like 2 groups that are actually the opposite, because negative kind of means like the opposite. So instead of these being negatives, I'm going to do the opposite of negative, which is positive. So I'm going to make these all positive, which now I have 6 positives. That would be my answer. So I'm going to be honest, on this problem, if you don't totally get what I just said about why this is actually positive, it's fine. If you really care, you can look up more examples online, but you might just want to trust me on this. But 1 and 2, these are the ones that need to actually like make sense. But if you just want to take blind faith on this one, that's totally fine. So let me add to my notes over here. A negative times a negative equals a positive. Okay. So we just found out that positive times a negative is a negative, negative times a positive is a negative, and then a negative times a negative is a positive. Okay, so these two you can draw out the symbols. This one you might just have to memorize. Okay. All right, let's do another example. So does this rule apply for dividing? Let's see. So what if I have negative 8 divided by 2? So that means I want to take negative 8 tiles and cut them into 2 equal groups. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, I want them in 2 equal groups. Oops. So here's one group, here's another group. So how many tiles are in each group? Well, there's going to be 4 negatives, so that would be my answer. Okay. So I can see here the same rules apply. If I do a negative divided by a positive, I get a negative. That's the same thing that we said over here. So let me put in red. This is for multiplying and dividing. So these rules work for both of them. So same thing. Okay, last short example. If I did example 5, I said negative 15 divided by negative 3. Basically, I know that 15 divided by 3 is 5. And then I know the answer should be positive because a negative and a negative, either multiply or divide, equals a positive. So I know that this would be my answer.